Well, the basic idea is that we are making things up. We are not so much discovering the truths about the world, but constructing what passes as the truths for the world. And the basis of the construction is, I'm sorry about my throat. The basis of the construction is social interests and things like that. What counts as social construction has changed a lot in the past 40 years or so. The the current versions probably started in the 70s, 1970. I think one of the first articles is the Foreman article about Weimar scientists and the birth of quantum mechanics. A lot of it takes off from there, and it went through the 1970s with people like Bloor and Barnes having a huge role, and so on. And and those people knew a lot of science. They were many of them had a good science education, but they were beginning to be suspicious of a whole lot of stuff, and this sort of try to give it a new and different interpretation when where social factors are playing a huge role. There's another version of it coming from the literary people who usually don't know much um, science at all, and are just will just glum on to something fancy that's sort of zippy, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and then try to say things about it. That's kind of much of that's pretty silly. The the science studies people are the more interesting one. They need to be taken seriously. Most philosophers didn't like them at all. Really didn't like them, and they really didn't like philosophers. That's because they saw philosophers as just defending science, and the philosophers saw them as attacking science stupidly. Okay, as time has passed, each has learned a hell of a lot from the other. So there's a lot less conflict now. And in fact, when I first got interested in this, Harry Collins, who's a major character, um, said reality has got nothing to do with science. Meaning, forget the world. It's got nothing to do with the world. Scientific theories and scientists and so on are just in a world of their own making. And he has since backtracked on that, and he'll actually make fun of himself when he's doing it. And well, not that recently now, but he wrote a book on gravity waves that was very well received by the scientific community. Philosophers largely liked it. I have one or two friends who thought it was terrible, but for the most part, they thought it was pretty good. And Collins still, emphasizes social factors in all of this, but he certainly thinks there's a world. Most of the people who I would have attacked, and Sokal would have attacked in a book like that, they're now in departments of science studies, and they still pay an awful lot of attention to social factors connected with science, but they tend to spend less time attacking the content of science as opposed to scientific institutions and how they arise, and how those institutions can lead to bad things. So, I mean, if you just have an institution and it doesn't do anything in terms of affirmative action, then it's just going to produce a whole lot of white male theorizers who might be as scientific as anyone could be in the sense that they're highly critical. But the trouble is, they have a very narrow range of imagination, and so they're trying to think of new theories, and they're constrained by their background. They're not evil. They're not they're not out to get women or visible minorities or anything like that. They just don't have the experience, and so an institution which makes sure it's got lots of non-white men in it is bound to have a much greater possibility of theoretical options. And then all of the good things about science, What's the evidence for this? What's the evidence for that? That can all take place, and it can improve things enormously. So I think people who worry about those sort of things are important, and they've improved thinking about science an awful lot. Now, you get a lot of philosophers who were hesitant about that before and said, why should it matter whether you're a man or a woman? It's just getting the ideas right. And they've come to realize, no, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it doesn't have to be evil, nasty people. They're just, you just need to engineer institutes like that. And there's a ton of stuff which is not threatening to the content of science, which is about institutions and and stuff which is just intrinsically interesting. Where do scientists come from? Are they working class people? Are they aristocrats? Are they middle class people? You know, are they men? Are they women? What happens to women when they're young that might encourage them to become scientists or discourage them? These are all wonderfully interesting and important questions. And